With all eyes on the new US president-elect, what should the world be doing to prepare for Donald Trump 2.0? He's pledged to end the wars in Israel and Ukraine, and quickly, but with different approaches. Domestically, he wants to conduct mass deportation of immigrants and to end Obamacare. But how many of his plans can he actually push through, and will they work? I'm Neil Harvey, and today's Newsmaker is Donald J. Trump. It will be Donald Trump's second and final term in the White House. That means he doesn't need to concern himself with things like ratings or re-election. So, Trump 2.0 is set to be unleashed. If he can follow through on his campaign promises, it will have profound consequences, especially for Palestinians and Ukrainians. He says he wants to help Israel finish its onslaught on Gaza as soon as possible. He also wants to stop the war in Ukraine before he's even inaugurated. But at what cost will he deliver peace? Will it mean more terror for Palestinians? Will Ukraine have to concede some of its land to President Putin? Let's take a look now at what Donald Trump has planned, both domestically and around the world.
So I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president and your 45th president.
We've been here before, but this time Donald Trump doesn't need to consider his ratings, just his legacy. And his effect on some parts of the world will be drastic. He's closer to Israel's Prime Minister than President Biden. And in fact, Benjamin Netanyahu describes Trump as the greatest friend Israel ever had in the White House. In his first term, Trump brokered agreements with Arab countries to recognize the State of Israel. He recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and scrapped the Iran nuclear deal. This time, he pledges to help Israel finish its war on Gaza quickly. And if that means giving Netanyahu's extremist government a free hand, then the situation for Palestinians in the Strip could get even worse.
If you want Israel to survive, you need Donald J. Trump as the 47th president of the United States. It's a very simple message.
Many in Netanyahu's cabinet want to redraw the map of Gaza, taking full control of the Philadelphia corridor so that Gaza no longer has a border with Egypt. Trump, though, is less likely to give Israel such a free hand in the West Bank. He's not a fan of Israel's illegal settlements there and doesn't approve of the Israeli desire to annex parts of it. In Ukraine, Trump has pledged to end the war before his inauguration in January. According to the acclaimed Washington Post journalist Bob Woodward, Trump has spoken to Russia's President Putin on several occasions since he left the White House in 2021. So could Trump threaten to stop funding Ukraine's war effort to force President Zelensky into a humiliating peace deal where he cedes the parts of his country already under the control of Russia? That would almost certainly lead to Zelensky's downfall and potentially encourage Putin to regroup his army and later try to take full control over Ukraine's access to the Black Sea. Trump is also a climate science denier. His domestic plans to cut climate regulations are most worrying for the rest of the world. The US is responsible for 25% of all the CO2 emitted into the atmosphere since the start of the Industrial Revolution, and Trump has little intention of stopping. In his first term, he pulled the US out of the Paris Climate Accords. This time, he plans to, in his own words, drill, baby, drill.
Starting on day one, I will approve new drilling, new pipelines, new refineries, new power plants, new reactors, and we will slash the red tape. We will get the job done. We will create more electricity also.
He wants to increase production of US fossil fuels, open up the Arctic wilderness in Alaska to oil drilling, and is not in favor of renewable energy. He also favors petrol-driven cars and has pledged to overturn Joe Biden's targets, encouraging Americans to switch to electric vehicles. On the campaign trail, one of the top concerns of voters was immigration. On that front, Trump has promised what he calls the biggest mass deportation of undocumented migrants in US history. Whether he can legally do that is another matter, but he is likely to follow through on his pledge to complete his gigantic wall on the border with Mexico. And then there is the biggest concern among US voters, the economy.
Inflation's terrible, and the economy stinks because of the inflation. It stinks.
Trump says he'll end inflation, but since it currently stands at 2.4%, it's effectively ended already. He also proposes new tariffs on at least 10% of most foreign goods and up to 60% on imports from China. And that could push inflation up, not down. With the Republicans having retaken control of the Senate and looking set to edge the Democrats in the House of Representatives, Trump could have a relatively free hand to push through his agenda. Where he might come unstuck, though, is in the US judicial system, where his policies, particularly on immigration, will likely be challenged through the courts.
So, can Trump deliver on his promises, and if so, how will he do it? Joining me to debate this are, in the Netherlands, the International Chair for Democrats Abroad, Martha McDevitt-Pugh. Joining us from Texas, we have Republican strategist at Nestpoint Associates, John Thomas. And joining us from Washington, D.C., we have White House and Washington reporter for Politico, Daniel Lippman. Welcome to all of you. Appreciate your time. Let's kick it off first by going to John, because I'm really interested. What does Donald Trump's victory mean for people in Gaza? Will President Trump, in your opinion, give Israel's Prime Minister a completely free hand to do whatever he wants in Gaza, and that maybe would that involve potentially seizing some Gazan territory? And I'm thinking particularly around the border with Egypt.
It's a great question. I don't think anybody definitively knows what Donald Trump will do, but we do know that Donald Trump is a huge supporter of Israel. He wants to see Israel succeed. A lot of Donald Trump's main political financial backers are of Israeli descent. So he's likely to cooperate with them and give them what they need. However, we also know that Donald Trump does not like wars. He definitely does not like American forces getting entangled in foreign conflicts, and his top priority is to end them. So there's this dual friction going on. If I had to guess at this point, I would say that Donald Trump is more inclined to give Israel what it needs to succeed, and that's going to be his starting point.
What about the cost of that, though? Because we saw a lot of protesters in the United States who are against the support that America's been giving to Israel and the loss of innocent life there. Does he not concern himself with any blowback there?
Well, that really wasn't part of Trump's political base. That was more on the far left side of the political base, which wasn't supporting Donald Trump. I don't think Trump considers that to be a mainstream view. So I'm sure, of course, Trump will consider all sides, but I don't see that as a real political force that would be swaying Donald Trump's decision one way or another.
Martha, let's bring you in here. Donald Trump's vowed to end the conflict in the Middle East. Is he going to do that by simply picking a side and putting all of America's resources behind Israel?
Well, thanks for that question. You know, I have to go with what was just said, and that is we really don't know what Trump is going to do. There's a lot of things that he has talked about, a lot of really big, huge things that he's talked about in his campaign, but we're going to really have to wait and see what he actually goes forward with. I think, you know, if you look at some of the things that he has promised, they're really quite contradictory, and so time is going to tell where he goes.
What about the loss of human life? There was a figure that was just reported today coming out of the UN Human Rights Department that said of the verified deaths that they have confirmed in Gaza, around 70% of them were women and children. If the US increases its support for Israel and gives them a free hand to do whatever they want militarily, is there not any concern coming from Republicans that that's going to mean more innocent lives lost?
Is that a question for me?
No, that's for Martha.
Oh, okay.
I just wonder, does she not have any concerns about the loss of innocent life potentially going up?
Well, I have a lot of concerns about what could be happening in this coming administration, and of course, we're in the final months of the Biden administration. You know, we're gonna move through those and make sure that we provide as much harm mitigation and make sure that we strengthen our democracy. You know, there's a lot going on there. But of course, there's concern about loss of life, wherever that is in the world. And again, we're going to have to wait and see what parts of Trump's campaign are actually going to be turned into policy. And I think that's a really good question for our Republican friend here.
Yeah, let's go back to you then, John. I mean, I asked Martha what about the Republicans because they're the ones who are going to be in power now. But I mean, as you are a strategist for the Republicans, it's not great optics, is it, if the party doubles down on Israel and the number of civilian deaths goes up?
No, I mean, it's not, but it wasn't like this conflict started on Trump's watch. He's handed this issue and he's going to try to navigate it the best he can. I think to Martha's point, all we can go really on is Trump's track record, not just of what his campaign promises were, but what he did in the last 4 years when he was president. And we know that the world was a relatively peaceful place under his watch. We know that he's not inclined to get involved in foreign conflicts. We know that he's spoken out against the Ukraine issue, saying he's going to end that on day one. And so that's going to be his stance, is he's going to want to end what's going on in Israel, not prolong it. Now, what does that actually look like in reality? I'm not sure, but that's his worldview, is he doesn't want these things to end. He doesn't want there to have to be more bloodshed. But at the same time, he's a huge supporter of Israel. So there is that conflict. But I trust, based upon the track record that Trump's last 4 years of presidency, that he'll come to a quick as resolution as one can in this matter.
Let's bring in Daniel Lippman now. Daniel, from your experience following Donald Trump when he was previously the leader of the United States, is it a given that he will throw his full support behind Benjamin Netanyahu? It seemed like there were some fractured moments towards the end of his term between the two. How would you assess their relationship?
Yeah, he was not happy that Netanyahu had congratulated Joe Biden, and he thought that they were closer than that. But Netanyahu had to get along with the next administration, and so that's why he did that. And he thinks that Israel is losing the PR war. He always thinks in terms of optics, and so I definitely think that he will give Israel what it needs. But if Trump believes that it's going to hurt him politically, then he may tell Netanyahu, hey, let's wrap this up. He has previously said that Israel should get this over with very soon. But those might just be words, and the machinery of the U.S. government in terms of supporting Israel, that will likely continue as normal. But there's going to be a lot of Arab American supporters of Trump who he got a lot of their votes a couple days ago, who will say, hey, you're abandoning what you promised, which is to end this war.
And just to help our viewers understand, as I mentioned, latest figures from the UN say almost 70% of the people killed in Gaza, women and children. Why is the United States continuing to throw its support behind Israel in those circumstances? What is the significance of Israel for the United States?
Well, Israel is seen as the a democratic beacon in the Middle East, and there aren't that many of them. I think Israel is the only one. Tunisia is no longer a real democracy, and so Israel has a lot of support from both parties. But in terms of those figures you cited, of course Trump is troubled by that. But he has a isolationist view of American foreign policy. He is not obsessed with human rights. This is a person who flatters Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, and so he takes a narrow view to American self-interest, and he doesn't really care for the UN very much. And so I think we should keep that in mind in terms of. This is someone who has wanted to pull out of NATO. So he doesn't really see the value of international alliances, and he is not subscribing to the democracy versus autocracy messaging that Joe Biden has made a principal part of his presidency in the last few years.
Martha, if we turn to the war in Ukraine, that's another war that Donald Trump has pledged to end, and really quickly before he even gets sworn in as president again. It's reported that he's continued to have phone conversations with the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, while he's not been in office. Does that suggest that Donald Trump will broker a peace deal that favors Russia? And is it likely that he will kind of force Volodymyr Zelensky into accepting such a deal by withdrawing US support for Ukraine?
Well, again, I'm not the person to ask what Donald Trump is going to do in the future.
But based on your knowledge of him and his relationship with Russia in the past, do you think that's likely?
Well, I think he's going to have a lot of challenges actually doing everything that he said he was going to do. There are so many contradictions in terms of what he's put out there. He wants to make massive cuts to the American government and cut programs that are going to really cut and impact the lives of some of his greatest supporters in rural areas. Cutting foods like programs like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid are heavily used in Republican areas. I think he's going to have a lot on his plate. And I think we're going to see as it unfolds what he's actually going to take on. I know taxation is one of the first things that they want to look at. That's really a topic that's really important to many Americans, including Americans that live abroad, who are my constituency. But even there, we're seeing that what he talks about and what he says he was going to want to do may be actually a lot more difficult to implement in reality.
John, do you think that Donald Trump's re-election is a disaster for Ukraine? Because he has complained in the past about the amount of money that the US has given to support President Zelensky. I mean, do you think this is a likely direction? You're a strategist for the party. Do you think this is where they're going, cutting support to Ukraine, pressuring them into a deal that most likely de facto is going to favor Russia?
I do think they're going to cut support for Ukraine. Trump's made that pretty clear that he doesn't think US resources should be going to other people's fights. So yeah, just bluntly, I don't think it's a great deal for Ukraine. However, he wasn't running for president of Ukraine. He's running for president of the United States. And it might work out at the end of the day that less blood will be shed if Trump can help bring an end to that war. So look, I don't think Zelensky is going to be happy about it, but I can tell you that American public opinion has been waning in terms of how much money it wants to send abroad, especially when we can't fund our own programs for our own people back here.
So for me, the interesting point there is it's quite possible that he will cut funding for one war to favour Russia over Ukraine, but will support Israel by perhaps upping support in the other. Why not treat both conflicts in the same way?
Well, the Ukraine conflict's been going on a lot longer, and I think Trump's goal is to end both of these. So if by providing temporary support to Israel, that provides a pathway to end that conflict, that's what he would do.
But the argument is about the cost, isn't it? He complains about the cost supporting Ukraine, but it's okay to have the cost of supporting Israel.
But it's one thing to send a short duration of funds to help somebody win that you support, but it's another to just keep feeding a conflict that never ends. There is no end in sight as it relates to the Ukraine war. And American public opinion has turned against that. I don't believe that's the American public opinion or Trump's opinion in Israel. Trump wants to end all of these issues. So if it requires a short-term funding to end it, that's okay. I don't think anybody would argue that anything going on with what we've been funding in Ukraine has been short-term, and nobody's argued an end to the funding.
Daniel, is Donald Trump still seen, because there was a point when he was accused of colluding with Russia, is he still seen as being pro-Russia? Or, in your opinion, is he pro whoever benefits the United States?
It often is whoever benefits him and whoever flatters him. That's going to be very important. It was in the last 4 years of his term. And so I think that it's more that he likes authoritarian leaders and he would want unchecked power if he could get that. But he is going to be checked by Republicans in Congress and his own administration. So he's not going to have too many dialogues with Vladimir Putin. But he looks at a country like Ukraine and says, hey, this deal that he is going to basically force Zelensky to sign is similar to what the deal would be a year ago and a year from now, because it does seem like a stalemate to a lot of Americans. And a lot of Ukrainians have died in this conflict, and he doesn't want to see that. But, I think it used to be in the Republican Party that Russia was and the Soviet Union, they were our arch nemesis. So it is highly ironic that in this era, Donald Trump has said many nice things about Putin, even as it has slid to becoming even more autocratic.
Is he seen as a president who gets things done? If we're talking about here realistically and potentially ending two conflicts by whatever means possible, I mean, is it fair to call him a man who gets results?
In terms of economics. A lot of Americans felt like he did, but he can't. After NAFTA, which was the free trade agreement between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, we had tens of thousands of factories move offshore to China and Mexico and Southeast Asia. And those factories did not really come back in large numbers during the Trump administration. And so I think that Trump was able to win back people based on inflation, but he doesn't, as president, you don't, of a country like the US, a capitalist society, he can't dictate what the prices are at the grocery store. And so it's really on the edges and cutting regulations and hoping that traditional Republican ideology is a boat that is a tide that lifts all boats.
John, some election promises are more unpopular than others. One that's very contentious is he's vowed to carry out a mass deportation of illegal immigrants in the United States. What about their legal rights? How is he going to do this?
Well, he's going to have to abide by the law in that process, but I think it also comes down to what is the order of deportations. I think first he said he wants to focus on those illegal aliens who have violent criminal records. He wants to first focus on them and then kind of move from there. But you're right, this isn't easy. It is complicated. There are bed requirements that you must have one bed per immigrant as they're in the deportation process. It'll be interesting to see how he puts all of those logistics together, and then of course the legal challenges that goes along with it. But look, he said this is his day one priority. He campaigned upon it, and there's a lot of Americans who voted for him because of this promise. So he's going to have to try his best to make this happen.
Is it just one of those election promises, though, that politicians make, knowing actually in reality there's a good chance he won't be able to come through?
I actually don't think that's the case. I do think that he'll be doing deportations. I've had conversations with several of his staff. They're preparing to do that now. So will they be able to pull it off? We'll see. I suspect they will to some degree, but Trump is very serious. This isn't just a campaign promise. He's going to attempt to do this.
Martha, I just want to get your response to this. Obviously, the Democratic Party is usually, pro-immigration and will not be in favour of mass deportations. But I just wonder, if we're talking about immigrants who are illegal, they have no legal right to be there, does Trump have a point here that it's acceptable to get rid of people who shouldn't be there?
Well, I think we have, a really wide range of folks in the United States who have an undocumented status. Many of them brought as children, unbeknownst to themselves, they were not United States citizens. But I think the point is that a lot of the U.S. economy really depends on undocumented immigrants. And it's going to be super challenging for Republican businessmen who are going to really object to losing their workers if he's going to carry out a massive deportation of 20 million people, as well as being an incredible logistical nightmare. It's projected to cost between 80 and 315 billion a year. So I think we're going to have to see how that plays out. And certainly, as was already noted, there are going to have to be choices made. And at the moment, we also have our Democratic governors in states across the country who are looking to see and make sure that anything like that takes place is happening in a lawful way.
Do you think, in any sense, that this is one of the areas where the Democrats maybe got it wrong in terms of gauging the national mood, in the fact that clearly there was a lot of people who see illegal immigration as an issue, but the Democrats haven't addressed it?
Well, I think, I think we see a lot of disinformation on this. I certainly, hear people saying that the Democrats are for, wide open borders, no borders at all. I mean, I've never met a single Democrat who's proposing that or seriously, talking that way. So I think, disinformation has played a really big role in this election. And I think, a lot of that is demonstrated, is showing up on Republican channels and is really pushed by Republicans, Donald Trump, to whip up a lot of hate and concern and fear among people who then ended up voting for Donald Trump. It's certainly an important issue and a serious issue in our country, as well as around the world. And it's certainly something that requires attention. And we were close to having a comprehensive immigration agreement not too long ago, which would have been historic. It's been 30 years since we've had comprehensive immigration reform, but that was taken off the table by Donald Trump. So as far as reforming our immigration system, we'll have to see how that plays out.
Okay, I'm glad you brought up disinformation, Martha. I think we've got about just over a minute left, and I want to give the final word to Daniel, because as a journalist, you'll know very well that Donald Trump regularly mixes truths with falsehoods. It's your job to report what he says, but also now, I mean, this has become a modern thing, hasn't it? Fact-checking world leaders. You have to check that what he says is actually true when you're putting it out. I just wonder, does it make it exhausting to be a reporter who follows Donald Trump?
Well, in the 2016 campaign, I was writing stories where I would watch a week's worth of Trump rallies and speeches, and he lied every few minutes in those events. And I think he told 30,000 lies or misstatements during his first administration. And so I think what is interesting is that a lot of Americans who support him, they know that he doesn't tell the truth all the time, but they're willing to do that if they're willing to tolerate that if they have a good economy and if they feel like they're being heard and not condescended to by elites in Washington and New York. And so we'll continue to fact check him, but he has really given license to a lot of politicians to say stuff that's not true, and that hurts the public discourse, because usually we're supposed to operate on facts to address our major public policy discussions.
And just very quickly, one last one. As a journalist, are you a little bit excited? Because whatever he is, he's entertaining, isn't he?
I think it'll be lots of palace intrigue going. I'm having a baby soon, and so I was going to take a paternity leave, but now covering this transition where there's already infighting, it'll be hard for me to take some time off.
I just want to say thank you to all three of you for joining me to discuss. He's back, whether you love him or loathe him, he's back. Donald J. Trump 2.0, unleashed this time. Doesn't have to worry about the polls anymore. Thank you so much to Martha, to John, and to Daniel. And of course, thanks to you guys at home for watching. Always appreciated. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter, and please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Neil Harvey. See you next time.